let me click it. There we go. Thank you, Amanda. So one of the topics that you'll read about is romantic attraction and love. This is one of the first chapters you'll read. And we're going to talk about theories and methods in chapter 1, but I thought we might as well do it in the context of some actual research on some topics that you might find interesting. And so we're going to talk today about some of the research on attraction, what causes people to, to choose their mates, to choose the mates that they do. And so over the years, I have studied a lot of different things. I was thinking last night, I probably have, published papers that relate to almost every chapter in the book. But I started out doing research when I was young, started doing research on attraction. And people would put things in my mailbox. Hey, Kenrick, look at this. And here's one that was thrown in my mailbox, a People magazine. This is like 20 years back. And it said, older actors and much, much younger actresses. Hey, Hollywood, what's the deal? Why are leading actors matched with co-stars half their age? And they have some examples. Harrison Ford in a movie with a woman who is, 3 decades younger than him. Same thing for Jack Nicholson. Same thing for Michael Douglas and Gwyneth Paltrow. Gigantic spread in the age. And, why are they doing that? So let's start out with a question for you guys. Which of the following is true? This will be your first, part of the attendance today. Men starring in movies are actually on average younger than the women who star in those movies. Men and women starring in movies are on average about the same age. Or C, men in Hollywood movies are indeed older, that reflects a feature of American society. Or men in Hollywood movies are older and it reflects a universal human tendency. So go ahead and pop your answer into the chat. That way we know you're here and are thinking about this, and we will then move on to talk about these things. All right. So here's an article that was in Elle magazine. 6 actresses speak out on sexism and ageism in Hollywood. And it says, in that article, age discrimination is a huge problem in Hollywood, particularly for actresses whose opportunities and wages begin decreasing as early as their 30s. And so one thing is, well, is this true? So one of the things that I've been doing for a number of years with my son, who works as a media outreach person in the psych department, and another student who's now a professor at Oklahoma State, we've been collecting data on just keeping track of what's the age of the guy who wins the Best Actor Oscar and the woman who wins the Best Actress. And so here's a few years from when I started giving lectures on this. In 2007, and these are maybe 1 year off from when the Oscars are awarded for the movie the year before, but doesn't really matter. But Daniel Day-Lewis was 49, Marion Cotillard was 31. Okay, Best Actors and Actresses in 2008: Sean Penn 47, Kate Winslet 32. So it looks like big age spread here in terms of who's given the Best Actor and Actress award. Jeff Bridges, 60, Sandra Bullock, 45 in 2009. 2010, Colin Firth, a little younger than the guys we've seen, but Natalie Portman is still way younger than him. She's 28. Now here's a reversal. Meryl Streep, age 61. Jean Dujardin, I'm not sure how you say that, but he's much younger than she is. So it isn't like it happens every year. Let's look at the last 5 years. In 2016, Brie Larson, 25, Leonardo DiCaprio, 40. So there it is again. The Best Actor is older. The next year, 2017, Emma Stone, much younger than Casey Affleck. But then in 2018, it again flips over. Frances McDormand is a little bit older than Gary Oldman, even though he looks a lot older in the role he's playing, but he is a year younger than her. And then in 2019, Olivia Colman was a decade older than Rami Malek. And 2020, Renee Zellweger is a little bit older than Joaquin Phoenix. Even though he looks older, she actually is older in terms of her birth year. So it actually turns out there's 91 years of this. And when you look across all 91 years, which is really what you want to do, rather than selecting particular specific examples, which people do all the time in the media. They say, hey, here's this one example. And the journalists do this all the time. They pick some person who has a crazy attitude and they talk about that person as if they're representative. And you don't know, what do most people think, you know? And so what happens most of the years? Well, the mean age of the best actress across 91 years was 35, and the mean age of the best actor is 43. And if you look at the median, one of the reasons we look at the median, if you took your statistics course yet, if a distribution has some outliers, you know, like Meryl Streep, who's a lot older and has won a lot of awards, that may pull the mean for that group in one direction or another. And so we often look at the median. Who's the person in the middle? You know, like with income in the United States, you want to really know the median income rather than the mean, because some people make so much more than all the rest of us. You know, they make thousands of times more than the rest of us. So the mean gets pulled up. You want to know what's the person in the middle make. And so the woman in the middle is, 32 is the middle age for women and 42 for men. And in 69 of 91 years, the actor was older than the actress. Okay, so that's probably statistically reliable. It seems to be, we looked at this, it's especially true in movies that have romantic themes. So here's the classic romantic movie, Gone with the Wind, in which Clark Gable was 37 and Vivien Leigh was 25. The other classic all-time romantic movie, Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart was 43, Ingrid Bergman was only 24. And I looked at, some more recent movies. Here's Silver Linings. That's not the full title, but it's basically Bradley Cooper was 36 and he was paired up with Jennifer Lawrence, who was 21. Then I went and looked last night to see, are there, what are movies of the last year? And here's a movie that was nominated by several people as one of the best romantic movies of last year. And it stars a guy, Johnny Flynn, who's 36, in a romantic relationship with a woman who is 23. So here's some other kinds of interesting factoids. This is the blue line, basically shows Denzel Washington's age when he starred in particular movies. Okay, and so you can see, of course, the movie, he was younger in 1990 than he was in 2012. That's necessarily the case. Okay, so his age has to go up linearly. But what about the women he's married to? Well, I actually did a kind of line of best fit. So he's aging straight up, but his wives aren't aging quite as rapidly as he is. Okay, in fact, in the movie Flight, his wife is 22 years younger than him. Whereas in the beginning, his wife was closer in age, 7 years younger than him.
There's a similar graph of Leonardo DiCaprio, which is, a lot of people know him. And like the graph shows his age compared to who he's dating, and the max is 25 for the age that he dates.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I like that. Yeah. So it's the exact same thing with him. Yeah. Leonardo DiCaprio, unfortunately, still looks about 19. So anyway, we go back to the question I asked you at the beginning, which of the following was true? Men starring in movies are actually on average. Incidentally, can you send me that? I'd love that link, the Leonardo DiCaprio thing. You have to do it right now, but so men are older in the movies. Okay. Now that there were two possible answers then that would have worked. One is, does this reflect the feature of American society? Does it reflect a universal human tendency? So we're going to ask, why is there this difference? Okay. And when you look at People magazine, who had that article that I told you about, their hypothesis, if you want to say, is that Hollywood directors are often older males who are, quote, trying to relive their youth And that implies that there's something special about Hollywood, right? That it's Hollywood directors are kind of strange. But there was another article that people put in my mailbox a number of years back on what they call the trophy wife syndrome. And it was about the fact that in the Phoenix Gazette, they put it, there's a growing trend among powerful chief executives who are discarding their long-standing spouses for, quote, trophy wives, women typically younger, beautiful, and often very accomplished. And here's a few examples of famous CEOs with much younger trophy wives. And it turns out that Fortune magazine actually had the ages of CEOs, and there's an interesting pattern here, which I'll show you. These are the men in their 40s married women who were 10 years younger on average, and there were over 100 of these guys that I believe in this original chart. But then the men who were in their 60s were marrying women who were more like 16 years. So it looks like as the man gets older, the spread between him and his wife goes up. It's like the Denzel Washington and Leonardo DiCaprio phenomenon. Back in real life, nothing to do with Hollywood, but it is powerful men again. And there were only 2 women who were CEOs of major corporations when this article came out in Fortune. It was 20 years ago. But those women both, were married, had recently been married to men who were older than them on average. Those women were, both in their 50s. They both married men who were slightly older than they were, which that's not a statistically reliable point, but I'll give you some that are. As we go through here. So in the Phoenix Gazette, they had quoted a sociologist from Bowling Green University, which is a state university in Ohio. It's a good school. And he's an expert on organizational behavior. And he had said, our cultural image of what's going on is that there's a cultural image of a mature man who's typically in his late 40s or 50s. He's successful in his career. Leonardo DiCaprio, he is and then there's the ideal female who's in her 20s or early 30s. And this should come as no surprise at all, he says, because we live in an advertising culture. So a couple of key things in that. He's basically laying out his explanation, but it's really a hypothesis, is that we can attribute the phenomenon to our culture. There's something special about American society, right? And so one of the things that we're going to talk about in here is these experts who throw this stuff at you in the media, and often they have PhDs, and they're at universities. Sometimes they're wrong, okay? Where do they come up with their ideas, or their opinions? And what kinds of evidence do we need? Part of what we're going to talk about in chapter 1 is if you want to determine which opinions are right and which opinions are wrong, you can't just ask who's more eloquent, okay? You really want to look at the data, okay? And so one of the things, first question is, where do people get these ideas, these hypotheses? And we're going to talk about 4 major theoretical perspectives. You don't even really need to write these down because they're going to come, they're going to come up again and again. And incidentally, I'm always going to put my PowerPoints up, and I'm going to try to record the lecture. Okay, sociocultural perspective, evolutionary perspective, social learning perspective, and social cognitive perspective. And again, these are going to come up again and again and again. So that's just giving you the big lay of the land, what we're going to cover today and next time. Okay, and I'm going to give you a question here. A sociocultural theorist would explain sex differences, men and women, differences between men and women, in terms of A, rewards and punishments from parents and teachers, or innate tendencies for people in diverse societies to pay attention to gender, or innate tendencies for men and women to make different cultural choices, or the beliefs, customs, and norms prevalent in a particular place and time. So go ahead and pop an answer into the chat on this one. Give us information that you're still here. Again, with these, you never have to get them right. Okay, so pick one of those. Now let's move on and talk about the answer to this. So let's deal with first the sociocultural perspective. It's a very popular perspective in psychology and in other social sciences, anthropology and sociology, and political science, and even in organizational behavior over in the business world. What drives social behavior? Why do you do the things you do? Why do you like the people you like? Why are you attracted to the people you're attracted to? Why are you prejudiced against the people that you are prejudiced against? And sociocultural theorists tend to focus on factors or forces in the larger social groups that you belong to. So you're in a particular cultural group, there are norms, what's appropriate about how you should behave within your cultural group. If when ASU gets back in session, which should happen in a few months now, people will wear shorts and t-shirts to classes. And that isn't necessarily the norm, in some schools. When I was a kid, not when I actually went to college, but, college students would wear chinos and blue button-down collar shirts, and the women would wear, skirts. And there was a certain kind of a way that college students dressed, and that's not the way it is, at least now, not at Arizona State University. There's also social class differences, okay? Upper class, middle class, lower class. There are a number of differences, and that determine things like, what kind of music do you listen to? How do you dress? Do you think it's okay to get in fist fights? So I grew up in a lower class neighborhood in New York, where people talk like this here, and I got in fights all the time, and it was perfectly normal. The people start punching one another out all the time. My son both of my sons have grown up in middle class environments, and my older son, who's now 40 or so, he had one fight in his life. And my younger son is 17, and he's never had a fist fight, which would have been unheard of in my lower class neighborhood. Also, your nationality and your ethnicity. So, different cultures have different norms. In my neighborhood, there were a lot of Irish and a lot of Italians. And if you went to talk to one of your friends who was Irish, they tell you to wait out in the hall. Okay, my family was Irish, and my friends waited out in the hall. When I went to an Italian kid's house, they'd drag me in the house, and they would immediately start feeding me. Hey, what, skinny kid? Yeah, come on, give him some food. Hey, Angela, you got some pasta for this kid? Okay, so perfectly different. People would hug you. The Irish people never hugged you, but the Italians, they would always hug you and kiss you. How you doing? Hey, eat. And one of the other things is that sociocultural perspective presumes that our cultural norms change. And so some of them are kind of faddish. What's hip today does often become passé. So again, norms can change, and they do vary across society. And that's what sociocultural theorists are mostly interested in. So here's an example of something that's culturally, this is a Tibetan woman, and these three guys are all husbands of hers. And sociocultural theorists, might ask a question like, they're very interested in how social behavior differs across cultures. How are sex roles different in Tibet, versus China, versus India, versus South America, versus North America. So very interested in differences across societies, in those changing and different norms. And they'd be very interested in the fact that, in some societies, there is this practice of polyandry, one which means many men, basically, in a marriage. One of the things that I noted a minute ago is that norms about various things, so you're going to read about romantic attraction. Norms about dating have changed, over my lifetime. In the 1950s, when I was a little kid, I would look at my old cousins, and they'd be, dancing around like this, doing the Lindy. And it turns out that during the 50s, if you were going to meet a romantic partner, the most likely place to meet them was at a church or at a dance. Is that still true? No. Yeah. I looked this up last year, and it might even have changed. Now it might be up to like 90%, okay? But last year, 40% of people met their partners online. So these are people who they've never known before often. They aren't people from their neighborhood who their family knows. So that poses a number of interesting challenges to us. When people are talking about behavior in sociocultural perspective, they will use terms like social norms, okay? And what a social norm is very simply, it's a rule or an expectation about what's appropriate. How should you dress? How should you hold your fork? You know, should you say, yes, ma'am, okay? Should you, should you wear, wild colors or conservative colors when you go to work, that kind of thing. The other term that socioculturist theorists use a lot is, obviously from the title, culture, okay? And what culture is here's the textbook definition. It's the beliefs, what you believe, what you customarily do, and what language you share with the people who live in your time and place. So on the block I grew up in New York, almost everybody was Catholic, okay, Irish and Italians, and they were almost all Catholic. I think I had one friend who was a Protestant, and I met one Jewish kid I went to some chemistry class at the local high school, and I met my first Jewish kid, okay? So we had certain beliefs. We're, mostly Catholics. We all went down to the St. Joseph's Church on the corner, and when we passed in front of it, we would cross ourselves as we walked in front of the church on the street. And we had certain habits. I said, we fought. Yeah, we took the subways into New York City to go to the museums. And we all spoke, mostly all spoke English, but we spoke with this sort of different accent that you would use than if you was living here in, Arizona and stuff like that, right? And if somebody spoke like that, that wouldn't seem weird or stupid to me. That's how people spoke English in my neighborhood. And some people even had a few Italian words, some of which were not nice, okay? The only Italian words I learned as an Irish kid were, you don't want me to repeat them. But I learned a few Italian words and a little bit about Italian culture. So here's a study that was done by social psychologists to show you the kind of thing that social psychologists do. This was a study that looked at the choices that people make and looked at intrinsic motivation as a function of your culture. And here's what they did. Okay, well, first of all, here's their assumption. If you grew up in American culture, you're taught to sort of cherish your own individual freedom, independence. Everybody goes their own separate way. You do your own thing, the Marlboro Man kinds of thing. And you make your own choices, you do what's right for you, okay? On the other hand, Asian culture tends to emphasize more collective values, okay? Should do what's right for your group or for your family in particular. You're interdependent with those people. And before you make a decision about something, you might want to check with your family and see, what they would want. That's at least the traditional Asian culture. And so there was a study in which researchers looked at kids, I think kids living in California, who either were from Anglo-American or Asian American households. And they asked them to solve a bunch of word puzzles. And there were piles of puzzles that they could work on. And they said, it can only work on one of these piles here. And they either said, okay, well, you pick which pile of, if you've got two piles of puzzles in front of you, pick the one that you'd most like to work on and work on that. Or, look, the experimenter would like you, there's two piles here, but the experimenter would like you to work on the one on the left, okay? Or your mom was in here earlier today, and she thought that you should work on the one on the left. Okay, so either you pick it, the experimenter picks it, or your mom, you're told that your mom picked it. And now what the dependent variable is, the thing that they were measuring, is how long did they stay working on those puzzles if they were puzzles that they had chosen or the experimenter had chosen or their mom had chosen. And of course, they distinguished between the Anglo-American and Asian American because that's what they're interested in here. So here's what Anglo-American kids did, okay? They completed an average of what looks like to be about 8 when they had chosen them themselves. If the experimenter chose them, though, they only did about half as many. They weren't as excited about it if somebody else made the choice. What about if their mom picked it? Yeah, that was like the experimenter, okay, that, no influence on their choice. It's like, I want to do what I want to do. And I'm more intrinsically motivated to do the things that I want to do. What if you're an Asian American kid? And those of you who are Asian American might have been able to guess the results of this, but the Asian American kids worked more on the puzzles when they were told that their mother had. In fact, they even worked more than when the Anglo-Americans picked it themselves. I'm not sure if that's significantly different, but it was the case that they were more motivated to work on it when their mother had picked the puzzles for them. So again, suggesting that Asian American kids are more attentive to what their family wants rather than what do I want. So when you read the chapter on romantic attraction, you'll see the sociocultural perspective pop in, here and there. Here's a statistic on attraction. Americans have their first kiss 3 years earlier than Japanese do. One survey looked at how many sexual partners do men and women want. It turns out that in that particular study, Australian women, in other words, for the rest of your life, ideally, how many different people would you like to have sex with? And for Australian women, it was about 4, right? That'd be great, but for Asian women, it was less than 2. It was mostly 1, okay? But a few Asian women wanted to have more than 1, so the mean was pulled up, okay? Okay, so let's go back to the trophy wife syndrome. We see that cultural norms can influence romantic behaviors, and the question is, do they explain the trophy wife syndrome? And so I'm going to show you that same quote from before. I highlighted a couple of things. This sociologist, who was obviously a sociocultural theorist, he talked about our cultural image. And then later he said, we live in an advertising culture. So he kept using the term culture. This is, your choice of a older mate if you're a woman or a younger mate if you're a man is a function of our culture, our cultural images and what we pick up from advertisements, okay? And here's some, prototypical ads that you might see, ads for makeup are very frequently, women who look to be a maximum of, 20 years old. Maybe she's all of 23, but judging from her skin tone, she'd be 19 years old. And then products that men buy, like golf equipment, are often middle-aged guys, like this guy, Phil Mickelson, who some of you may know was an ASU student. He actually took this class. And in fact, at the end of the semester, he came and asked if he could take the final early because he had an opportunity to play on the pro tour. And I said to him, really, are you that good? Is that a good investment of your time? He said, I'm pretty good. And if you know anything about golf, it turns out I didn't know anything about golf, but people told me later that he went on to become one of the best golf players in the world, kind of right up there with Tiger Woods. Okay, so there are advertisements that do contain a lot older men and younger women. And let's look at some other sources of data though. There was a book called Dataclysm that was written by the guy who started OkCupid. One of the guys started, and he was actually a math major at Harvard, I think. And he wrote a book on what kind of data they've extracted from OkCupid. And one of the things that he has in there is he talks about the age that people are most likely to click on, okay, when they look at OkCupid. And I put this in terms of, and you'll see this graph come up a few times, plotted on the x-axis is the person's age, and on the left are men's age, men in their 20s, men in their 30s, men in their 40s, men in their 50s. you know, this is women in their 20s, women in their 30s, women in their 40s, women in their 50s. And there's the, you know, the equivalent data points, right? Guys in their 40s. Okay. And so what are you seeing here? Well, what you're seeing is, let's look at men. Men in their 20s are clicking on women just about a year or two younger than they are. Men in their 50s are clicking on women who are like 30 years younger than they are, right? Now, what are women clicking on? Well, women as they get old are clicking on younger men, but it's not that much younger, okay? At the extreme, women in their, you know, 50s seem to click on guys 7 years younger. Women in their 60s, though, click on, I think these are in 5-year increments from what I can tell. Women about 55 maybe, click on guys who are close to their age. And almost, again, there's a slight drop, but compare the drop for the men and the drop for the women. That's kind of, you know, dramatically different. So what I've now put up here are data that we collected from singles advertisements. This was back around 1990 in Phoenix, Arizona. And this gray line over here, okay, this is what men said they wanted in singles ads. Now notice that young men said that they were interested in women from 5 years older to 5 years younger. So a guy in his 20s is interested in a woman in her 20s, okay? But a guy in his 50s, his maximum age is 7 years younger than him, and his minimum age is like a whole other musical generation. She's 15 years younger. What do women say in singles ads, or what did they say back then in Phoenix? They said this, which looked a lot like the clicks in OkCupid. Women had nothing against slightly younger guys for at least many years of their lives, but their maximum was way up here. You know, even women in their 60s and 70s were saying they'd be interested in guys up to 10 years older. This, you know, there's fewer of them than there are women, and so that poses a problem. And, you know, women in their 60s actually said that they were interested in only guys from their age to 10 years older. Okay, and so these are people who are not CEOs of corporations. They're not people who live in Hollywood. Okay, they're just American citizens. Okay. Oops, am I going to have this? This is terrible. How am I going to? Can I get rid of the annotation? I worry that this is going to be here the whole time now. Amanda, do you have any idea how I can kill the annotation? I bet you there's a, hold on here, eraser. Okay, boom, here I am, I'm erasing. I guess that's not, I'm gonna have to figure out a better strategy than marking up over one slide. Okay, so now we're moving back to, this is the OkCupid clicks that I showed you before, but now what he looked at is, you know, who do people send messages to? Men look at younger women, as you can see, as I showed you this before, but they message women closer to their own age. And what's going on there, if you think about it, you can probably guess what's happening. These guys, sure, they're going to click on a woman 30 years younger, but, you know, why don't they actually send a message to that woman? And those of you who are 30 years, think of, you know, college women, think of men 30 years older, you're probably not going to respond to a guy who's 30 years older, unless he's an extremely special individual, okay? But you might respond to a guy who's 10 years older. And so guys kind of understand that. They send messages to women close to their age, still younger than them. And now I've got some other data here. This red line shows the actual marriages. This is from Phoenix, Arizona, but it's not that different in other places. Who do men marry? They marry women who are about the ages of the women they click on in OkCupid. And this marriage data is 20 years old, but I'll bet you it's going to look the same because the OkCupid data is much more recent. So it looks like men are in tune with what their possible options are. Okay, so Here's another question for you, our intermittent attendance check. The effects of personal versus parental choice on Asian and European American children's motivation were discussed in terms of, and I need to get my mouse over here. A, media influences on children's choices, or was it B, inherent conflicts between parents and children's perspectives? Or was it different societal norms regarding collectivism and individualism? Or was it media influences on materialism and hard work? And you can just pop an answer to that in the chat. And I'm guessing this is a pretty easy one for you. It's obviously, the answer is C. But it might not, 2 weeks from now, it might not have stuck in your memory quite so much unless you rehearse it. Okay, so here's another question for you. I'll make my other screen brighter. A sociocultural theorist might explain the trophy wife syndrome in terms of A, people's innate tendency to be drawn to the media, similarities between different cultures, societal expectations about beauty, C, the universal human tendency to value men who achieve high status, or D, the norms of American society that emphasize career success in men and women and career success in men and youth and beauty in women. Okay, so pop an answer to that in there. You should be able to infer that from what the sociologist Arthur Neal had said before. Sociologists are not into innate tendencies, and they're more interested in differences across cultures. So D is the answer there. So let's move to the next perspective, the evolutionary perspective. So what drives your behavior? Who you're attracted to, who you feel good or bad about, what you pay attention to. From an evolutionary perspective, we have some genetic predispositions that we inherited from our ancestors that incline us to respond in adaptive ways. Adaptive means ways that would have enhanced our ancestors' survival and reproduction. When we see certain events, recurrent things that happen, certain kinds of things happen to us that also happen to our ancestors. And so we have some mechanisms. So here's an example of one such thing. We can quickly detect anger. Okay, we're very good at identifying emotions in other people's faces, and anger is an especially important one because it may mean this guy, this big brawny guy, may be coming for you with that look on his face. So you don't want to be sitting around thinking, I wonder if is he happy or is he feeling, romance or what, it's like, boom, we can just see right away, this guy's pissed off, okay? And we can make that decision in about 580 milliseconds. If it's a woman, we're also good, but it's actually significantly faster if it's a man. 540 milliseconds is faster than 580 milliseconds. We're a little bit quicker at detecting happiness on the face of a woman, as it turns out. And well, again, that would be an adaptive thing, not to miss it when somebody's about to attack you. So evolutionary theorists ask a different kind of question. They are likely to ask the question of, are there similarities in social behavior across species rather than differences across cultures? They want to look at similarities. They want to see the universals. Okay, so here's an example. Okay, so polygyny is common across societies, across human societies. One man, multiple wives. And when you look at polygynous men, they tend to have high status, and you tend to get more polygyny in places where the resources are unevenly distributed, where there's inequality, where some guys just have a better plot of land or, more access to resources than others, or more wealth in one way or another, okay? More income inequality, more polygyny. And it turns out that in other animal species, like in indigo buntings, the similar sort of thing happens. Most indigo bunting males attract one mate, But some of them who have very rich territories, who manage to defend a nice territory down by the river with lots of bugs and seeds and the kinds of things that buntings eat, they have multiple mates, like that guy, the African guy we just saw. And it looks like it's females doing the choosing. Female birds, a lot of biologists talk a lot about female choice. Okay, these males don't bully these female buntings to, the female buntings are attracted to the territory and the guy comes with it. Okay, and it's, again, only a small percentage this happens for. Polyandry is much rarer than polygyny. It's very rare to find a society where one woman marries multiple men. There's only a small handful of them, whereas the majority of societies have been polygynous. And when do you find polyandry? Well, you find it in places where like up in the Himalayas, where resources are extremely scarce and where it's hard for one couple to raise children. So what happens then is, and somebody can tell me, from an evolutionary perspective, it's very costly for two guys to share the same mate. How do they reduce this cost? Do you know, would you take a guess about those three guys? Anybody want to venture a guess? What would make it less evolutionarily costly to share a wife with another man? When would it possibly?
Having to deal with less competition?
When there's less competition, well, when there's
like you don't have to compete, like if you're all just after like one.
Yeah, I'm suspecting there is competition here. Guys really want those wives, okay? And so the fewer wives, the more competition. But it's more like genetic competition. Who's got the least level of genetic competition with a guy? It turns out the answer is that these guys are brothers, okay? That they share 50% of their genes. So if you invest in your brother's offspring, you at least have a quarter interest in that kid, and maybe you have a half interest in that kid. And so that turns out to be true in humans and in other animals. When you find polyandry, the males tend to be brothers. So there's a regularity there, and that's the kind of thing evolutionary theorists look for. The other thing they might look at, besides looking at similarities across species, an evolutionary theorist would look at what are the similarities across cultures? So there's a lot of differences between societies, but what's similar? So let's go back to older men and younger women. And I'm first going to show you some data that my colleague, Rich Keefe, who was a graduate student here many years ago in the clinical psych program, when I was in here as well, I was a student here as well. We collected some data looking at singles advertisements. We did this because some group they knew I studied attraction. They asked me to come, a singles women's group asked me to come and tell them about what's going on with men, what's the deal. One of the things they pointed out to me, I'll show you in a second, is that there was something very funny in the ads in the magazines that the singles people were putting out. This is what women said they wanted. I showed you this before. This is the maximum age, and this is the minimum age. The one at the bottom is the minimum age. Women are interested in their 20s. Women are interested in guys their age, 10 years older. In their 50s, they're interested in guys 5 years younger, but 7 years older. What are men interested in? I don't think I showed you this part of the graph. I did actually. Men in their 20s are interested in women their age. Men in their 50s are only interested in women younger and way younger. So when we first presented this data, I presented at the University of Michigan, and some guy in the back of the room said, that's just America. First he says, that's just American society. And second of all, those guys don't get what they want. Well, the women do get what they want. This is the women's age of marriage here in the center. What did the men get? Okay, well, I already showed you this too. As men get older, they marry younger women. And in fact, it goes right down the center of what they say they want in these singles ads, okay? So this is again suggesting that the whole deal of this is something about Hollywood or powerful men in American society. These are regular guys, okay? And then what about teenagers? Well, teenagers don't take out singles ads, but with Christina Gabrielidis, we collected some data in New Mexico and asked teenage boys and girls. I actually started with my son, who was 13 at the time, and I said, what's the oldest woman or the youngest woman that you would go out with? And he said, I don't know if you want to give psychology studies, Dad. And I said, oh, come on. Would you go out with an 8-year-old? He said, that's disgusting. That's sick. You know, how about an 11-year-old? Oh, man, that's crazy. What about a 12-year-old? Well, he's 13. He said, yeah, maybe. What about older? How old would you go? And he said, he asked a question that a lot of these young guys asked us, is she interested in me? Because those of you guys who've just finished your teenage years, you know what it's like. You know, we're not in as much demand as the teenage women are. So the guy, so I said, yeah, she's interested in you. He said, well, I wouldn't want to go above the 20s. So here's a 13-year-old boy saying that he would date somebody into her 20s. Maybe it was just my son was, you know, strange, okay? So we collected some data on a bunch of people's sons and daughters. And it turns out that here's what men wanted over here. So teenage boys are interested in girls who are a year younger, but they're also interested in women up to 7 years older. They incidentally don't think they have a snowball's chance in hell of getting a date with those women, okay? They just find older women attractive, okay? And that's inconsistent with a lot of sociocultural norms. Teenage boys are very sex typed. They're very concerned with looking macho. More than any other age, the worst age for macho is the teenage years. And as you get older, you become less and less and less. You know, if you ask me to carry, you know, my wife's purse across campus now, even if it was a florid little purse, I'd probably carry it. If you asked me when I was 17 years old, I would, no, please, you know. But teenage boys are very sex typed, okay? And yet, they're interested in older women. What the heck is going on there, okay? What are girls interested in? Well, girls are interested in guys their age up to 7 years older, okay? So they're leaning towards older, but so are teenage boys, okay? So from an evolutionary perspective, what underlies the trophy wife syndrome? There's a theory called evolutionary life history, which basically just says that as animals get older, they have to allocate their resources to building their body or to, you know, to finding mates or to investing in their offspring. And that changes over the span of the life. And so evolutionary life history theorists would say that, well, what men are interested in here, why are teenage boys interested in older women? And why are older men interested in younger women? Because men are interested in a partner who is closer to the peak of fertility. And the peak of fertility is about age, it's in the mid-20s, okay, is when women are most fertile, okay? And women are completely infertile before puberty. And then women again become infertile after menopause. Men, as they get older, they can actually still continue to have offspring if you can wake them up. So for what this means is that for older men, they're interested in younger women because that's for a guy who's 40, peak fertility is younger than him. But for young guys, peak fertility is older than him. So that would help explain this difference that you found. How can you distinguish this evolutionary perspective from the cultural explanation? Okay, so if it's culture, what we should find is, remember, cultural theorists look for differences across societies. We have different norms. The Italian Americans act differently from, you know, the Irish Americans, who act differently from the Hispanic Americans, who act differently from, you know, German Lutheran Americans and so forth. And you should see that the trophy wife syndrome should vary with society, and it should change over the course of history. If it's about the human reproductive lifespan, though, that's consistent across cultures. We're all the same species, okay? No matter where we live, we're the same species. There might be differences in our nutrition that cause us to reach puberty sooner, for example. But all across the world, humans can't reproduce until they reach puberty, and they can't reproduce after menopause. So we set out to find out what's going on in other societies. And the first society we looked at was the Netherlands. And so this is some data from Tilburg, which is in the southern part of the Netherlands. They probably call it Tilburg. And it was from a guy named Guus van Heck, who is a professor there. And these are singles data. And now look, they look just like American singles data. Now you could say, well, you know, the Netherlands, in fact, Netherlands used to have the same king as England. And so, you know, it's in many ways a similar society. What about India? Okay, so India is interesting because Indians mostly do speak English, okay, but they do cling to some other kinds of, you know, customs, you know, Hindu and Muslim and a number of other groups, you know, that most people in India are Hindu. A number is Muslim, and I think there's a few other groups, but here's an ad: wanted a non-Bharadwaj, smart, good-looking, preferably employed Kerala Iyer girl below 25 for a Kerala Iyer boy 29, chemical engineer. The guy's a chemical engineer. Contact with horoscope. So here's something that's interesting. There's a lot of differences. First of all, this ad is taken out by the guy's family, not by himself. Second, almost all the ads wanted horoscope. They also talk about your kind of your tribal alliance and, you know, your social caste, which is what all these things like non-Bharadwaj and Kerala Iyer are referring to. Okay, they want someone who's similar to their, you know, social caste, and they want to see your horoscope. So there's a lot that's different. Okay, and the family takes it out. What did they ask for? Okay, that's what the men's families asked for. As the man got older, they asked for a younger wife, and here's what the woman's family asked for. They always asked for a guy who was slightly older. Incidentally, this is the age of Academy Awards that I told you about before. And another thing about India is that they have their own version of the Oscars, which is the Bollywood Awards. And when you look at, well, one of my former graduate students, Jamie Krems, collected some data on stars in Bollywood movies. And I don't know if this is from their kind of, quote, Oscar winners or just from the stars in the movies, but I think it's from the big stars in the movies. The difference is even bigger. The average man who wins awards, stars in Bollywood, is in his late 40s, whereas the average woman is in her early 30s. Here's another society show. This shows you Malaysia and Indonesia, and up in the upper right are the Philippines. And my colleague, Rich Keefe, who did a lot of this research with me, his wife was from a little island in the Philippines. So I'll zoom in on just the Philippines. And the Philippines are a whole bunch of islands, but then I'll zoom in a little further on a little teeny island called Poro. Okay, so Poro was a fishing village when Rich Keefe went there in the 1990s. And most of the people treat him like a celebrity because they hardly ever saw European American looking people. And he was able to get the records from the local church. All the people had been converted to Catholicism there, but the missionaries had long since disappeared. And now the priests were Filipinos as well. But he was able to get the records of marriages going back to like 1910. And here's what you found in terms of, this is what men on Poro, back in 1913 to 1929, this was, and it was the same in more recent, but this was just to get before they were only then just starting to watch television back in the 1990s. This was before much contact at all with European society. Notice that men in their teens married women their own age, men in their 50s married women who were way younger, okay? So there's no Hollywood here. there's no influence of Hollywood, and virtually no influence of American society on this little teeny island. And yet that's what the women, so the women at all ages married older men. The men married younger women. And you may ask the question of how does this work out mathematically? It's because some young men don't get married and some older women don't get married. And so that's how the math works out there. Here's going back a little further in time. This is Henry VIII. Henry VIII, his first wife was Catherine of Aragon. He married her when he was 17 and she was in her early 20s. But then he famously had 6 wives over the course of his life. He wasn't very nice to some of them. And his last wife he married when he was 51. She was 20 years younger than him. So he starts off with an older woman, ends up with a younger woman. And he was incidentally born in 1492, the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So we can't blame this on American movies, okay, or on American society at all. This was going on, long before. Let's return to this. Which of the following is true of male and female age preferences in mates? A, and again, pop an answer into the chat on this. Women of all ages are interested in men from around their own age to up to several years older. Very young men are interested in older as well as younger women. Older men are interested in women who are substantially younger than themselves. Or is it all of the above, or possibly none of the above? All right, hopefully this is fresh enough on your mind that you know the right answer to that question, which is D, all of the above. Let's go back to the Academy Awards. Again, this is the people who won the Academy Awards. And so, remember the explanation that People magazine said was these Hollywood directors are trying to relive their youth. Well, maybe instead what they're trying to do is give the audience what the audience wants, okay? Because women are attracted to older men and men are attracted to younger women. And so here's something, what Jamie Krems looked at was the top grossing films, the movies that people pay money to see. What are the age of this? What's, rather than what the Hollywood directors are throwing out there, because they're throwing out a lot of things, older women, younger women, middle-aged women and so forth. What's the audience paying for? The movies that do the best have men who are in their late 30s and women who are in their late 20s. So the men are 10 years older than the women, even more than the Academy. So the Academy Awards, if anything, understates what the audience is interested in. And so when we talk about these, that there might be these evolved preferences for young women are attractive to men because of fertility. Older men are attractive to women because as men get older, they acquire more resources, okay? And so even though you don't want a guy who's so old is gonna die next week, a guy a little bit older is more likely to have acquired some resources. And some people have asked the question of, well, what's the relationship between these sociocultural norms, what your society says you should do, and our evolved preferences? And one theory is that they're independent. Orthogonal is just a fancy statistical word for independent, okay? That there's no, connection between, if you like New York versus Chicago pizza, that preference for pizza has nothing to do with biology. There's no biological advantage of New York over Chicago pizza, that's the right answer, incidentally, unless you're from Chicago and then you think I'm completely crazy. Another idea is that, well, maybe cultural norms and evolved preferences work against each other, that we come up with social norms to try to tame our selfish biological impulses, like thou shalt not commit adultery. We have that rule because, well, left to their own devices, a lot of people will commit adultery. And then another possibility is that cultural norms might amplify our natural preferences. They start with basically Ben and Jerry's is a good metaphor here. We have a strong preference for sugars and fats because our ancestors were often on the verge of starvation, and getting a really sugary really ripe fruit, okay, or a really fatty food was pretty hard for them. If you look at hunter-gatherers, they're all pretty darn skinny, okay, and sometimes they starve to death. And so what Ben & Jerry's is doing is basically taking something that we evolved, the desire for fats and sugars, and it's giving us more of it. There was no food you could have found in the ancestral environment that tasted anything like Ben & Jerry's double chocolate fudge, okay? You know, our ancestors would have killed for something like that, okay? So Ben & Jerry's is using modern technology to give us something we couldn't have had. And in some sense, maybe that's what Hollywood's doing too. They're giving us, they're just playing into our desires, okay? And so here's some, I'll close on a couple of slides here, and then I'll get one more question for you, the remaining 3 minutes. This is the difference between men's and women's age from those, you know, men, I showed you this before, you know, at marriage, okay? What do you see in Hollywood movies, okay? What you see is that as men get older in Hollywood movies, their wives get younger, but much faster than in real life. Again, they're giving us an exaggerated version of real life. And what about women? Well, what you see is that older women are with men their own age, but for young women, they're with these much, much older guys. So again, exaggerations of real life. Here's another one. This is the sex ratio. How many men and women get married? How can you get those big discrepancies? Because young women are more likely to get married than young men. That's the blue bar on the left in Seattle. Slightly more men got married, women than men got married. Anything above the line says more women. And as people get older, more men get married. Well, what about in Hollywood? Well, the sex ratio in movies, this is in romantic movies, is just an exaggerated version of that. You know, there's way more marriages between young women and older men, more or less. All right, so I think I have one question for you, although I might have two, but hold on here. So which of the following is true? Actually, no, we're back to the question we started with. Men starring in movies are actually on average younger than women. Men and women starring in movies are on average about the same age. Or men in Hollywood movies are older, reflecting a feature of American society. Or is it men in Hollywood movies are older and it reflects a universal human tendency? So pop your answer in to that question. And hopefully if you were paying attention, you know that the answer is what? Somebody turn on the microphone and tell me what the right answer is, because you know it for 100% sure.
D.
It's D.
It's D. Yes, it is D. Okay. All right. I will see you all next week. Have a good weekend. And incidentally, get on the textbook, because we're going to look and see if you're not connected, if you know we don't see you start working out, we're going to check with you to make sure that everything's okay. And if you have any problems, just let us know. Okay. At any rate.
Thank you. Have a good day.
See you guys
Thank
later.
you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank
You too. If anyone has a question who's remaining, you can.
I do.
Go ahead.
I was actually speaking with Amanda right now, but since you guys are both here, I'll just ask right now. I was asking her if the loose leaf version was free, or if it was, I mean, if it was just a purchase, or if it's a rental.
It's a purchase, so you get it. I think they mail it to you is how it works. So if you got the book through ASU's bookstore, you should have gotten a link that would allow you to click a button to put in your address, and then they'll send you the book, I think is how that works. Or you can, if you didn't get the loose leaf version, I think you can go back on and upgrade in some way. Although I have to admit, I don't quite know how to do that, but we do have contacts with Pearson. So if you're into an obstacle, let me know.
Okay, alrighty. I had another question.
Yes, it's a real hard, it's actually a loose leaf. It's like real loose leaf. It's just the book, basically, without a cover.
Yeah. The other question was, for the Rebel Access, is that one a rental just for the semester, or does the digital version stay?
I do not know the answer to that question. I kind of think you only have access for the time that I say the class goes to, which I made it go to August, which is another reason to get the loose leaf, so you actually have some record of the book. But that's a question for them rather than for me. I don't really know.
Okay.
So yeah, again, I'm kind of uncertain. I do know that actually somebody tried to click the link from last year because we mistakenly sent it and it said, oh, this is no longer available. So it does go away at some point.
Oh, okay.
But
Alrighty.
exactly how, yo no sé. I don't know.
I understood you perfectly. My first
okay.
language is Spanish.
Oh, all right. My son is taking it now in high school, so he's forcing me to hablar español en casa. Pero yo no estoy muy bueno. Yo estoy como un 4 años bambino in italiano. How do you say it in Spanish?
Italiano?
No, how do you say it? Bambino. What's the Spanish word for bambino?
I'm not sure.
Oh, bebe.
Oh, what is it in?
It's bambino just means baby in Italian.
Oh, then yes, bebé.
Bebe? Okay.
Bebé.
Yeah. Yo estoy como un bebé en mi español.
Mejor que un bebé.
Okay, o solamente un poco. All right. Any other questions or?
No, that was it. I'm going to go ahead and purchase that right now.
Okay, excellent. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
But see you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Amanda?
Yes.
Did you, I should have recorded this, so I need to now say, okay, I need to stop the share and I need to end it and then it'll record it. But,
yeah, one quick thing though before you go.
Okay.
Actually,
well, you know what, before you ask that quick thing,
yeah.
Let's end it and I'll go back on. So I'm not recording your question and all this other stuff, you know, because it's probably a big file.